Have you ever watched a brilliant child be labeled as stupid by the very institutions designed to nurture their minds? What if I told you that some of our most gifted children are being destroyed by the very schools their parents pay thousands to attend? Contrary to what elite educators believe, 10-year-old Marcus Richmond wasn't learning disabled or intellectually deficient. The $60,000 a year private school that expelled him as unteachable had simply never bothered to understand how his extraordinary mind actually worked. I've researched hundreds of cases where gifted children were misdiagnosed by expensive institutions, and this story reveals something shocking about our education system. It exposes how traditional schools can completely miss genius when it doesn't fit their narrow definition of intelligence. By the end of this story, you'll understand why some of the most brilliant minds are overlooked by expensive institutions, and how one person's belief can unlock genius that everyone else missed. You'll see why the most expensive education isn't always the best education. Ms. Angela Washington transformed Marcus from a hopeless case, expelled by elite educators, to a child reading at college level in just 4 months, proving that the right teacher doesn't need fancy credentials. They need to see the child, not the label. If you skip this story, you'll miss the moment that shows why the most expensive education isn't always the best education, and why the person who believes in your child might be someone completely unexpected. The Richmond family's 12,000 square foot Connecticut estate represented everything money could buy: imported marble crystal chandeliers and a private library wing containing rare books worth more than most homes. But inside this palace of privilege, a devastating failure was unfolding that no amount of wealth could solve. David Richmond, worth $2.1 billion from his tech empire, sat in his mahogany-paneled office, staring at a letter that made his stomach turn. His wife Patricia, a former investment banker turned socialite, held the matching copy with trembling hands. The letter had belonged to Thornfield Academy, the most prestigious preparatory school in New England, where their 10-year-old son Marcus had been enrolled since kindergarten. After careful consideration and extensive evaluation, we must recommend that Marcus Richmond be withdrawn from Thornfield Academy. Despite significant remedial interventions, Marcus continues to perform well below grade-level expectations and displays behavioral patterns incompatible with our academic environment. The letter was politely devastating, professionally cruel. Dr. Blackwood Thornfield's headmaster had essentially declared their son intellectually deficient, while maintaining the refined language that $60,000 annual tuition demanded. Marcus had been struggling at Thornfield since first grade, but his parents had attributed his difficulties to adjustment issues, immaturity, or temporary setbacks. Surely their bright, curious son would eventually flourish in the finest educational environment money could provide. Instead, Marcus's academic performance had declined each year. By 4th grade, he was reading at first grade level, while his classmates devoured chapter books. His mathematics skills lagged significantly behind grade expectations, and his teachers reported constant, disruptive behavior and inability to focus during lessons. The school had recommended a parade of expensive specialists, each adding another layer of labels and interventions that seemed to make Marcus withdraw further into himself. Dr. Harrison Webb, an educational psychologist charging $500 per session, had diagnosed Marcus with ADHD processing disorders and significant learning disabilities. His solution involved medication and behavioral modification programs that turned school into a series of rewards and punishments. After $15,000 in assessments over 2 years, Marcus was more anxious and confused than ever. Mrs. Elizabeth Kane, a learning specialist at $400 per session, had implemented intensive reading remediation using traditional phonics methods. She grew increasingly frustrated with Marcus's resistance to conventional approaches, eventually suggesting that his parents weren't supporting structured learning at home. Another $12,000 had been spent watching Marcus struggle with methods that seemed to make reading even more difficult for him. The final straw came during Marcus's most recent parent-teacher conference. Dr. Blackwood, surrounded by Marcus's teachers and specialists, delivered his professional verdict with the cold precision of a medical diagnosis. Marcus lacks the intellectual capacity for our academic standards, he stated matter-of-factly. We recommend placement in a specialized school for children with learning disabilities, or perhaps homeschooling with significantly lowered expectations. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Their son was simply not smart enough for a school that prided itself on producing future Ivy League students. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of professional experts telling you that your child is fundamentally limited? The social implications were devastating. David's business associates began asking pointed questions about Marcus's academic progress. Patricia's social circle buzzed with whispered conversations about the Richmond boy's limitations. Extended family members suggested genetic testing or quietly wondered about adoption records. The family's marriage strained under the weight of judgment and disappointment. David threw himself deeper into work, avoiding the daily evidence of his son's struggles. Patricia oscillated between denial and despair, spending thousands on additional tutors and specialists while secretly researching residential schools for special needs children. Most heartbreaking was watching Marcus internalize the labels that expensive educators had assigned him. The bright, curious child who had once asked endless questions about how things worked had transformed into a defeated 10-year-old who believed he was stupid and broken. Marcus began refusing to attempt new learning tasks, claiming, "I'm too dumb," before anyone could help him. He developed anxiety around academic activities and started acting out the problem child role that had been assigned to him. The natural love of learning that had once characterized this bright child was being systematically destroyed by an educational system that couldn't recognize his gifts. When Thornfield Academy delivered their final expulsion notice, the Richmond family faced a crisis that their billions couldn't solve. They had exhausted the most expensive educational options available, consulted the most credentialed specialists money could hire, and their son was further from academic success than ever. It was in this moment of desperation that Patricia Richmond, scrolling through online tutoring services, came across a modest profile that would change everything. Angela Washington, a 45-year-old educator from Detroit with a master's degree from Howard University, was seeking private tutoring opportunities to help fund her own children's college expenses. What the Richmond family didn't know was that Angela brought 20 years of experience teaching brilliant children who had been overlooked, misdiagnosed, and dismissed by traditional educational systems. She had seen gifted minds labeled as deficient simply because their intelligence didn't conform to middle-class expectations or standardized assessment methods. Angela had specialized training in multiple learning styles and cultural responsiveness that expensive private schools often lacked. She understood how creativity and intelligence manifested differently across cultural and cognitive contexts, and she had personal experience raising highly intelligent children on limited resources. But to the Richmond family, Angela represented their last hope. Someone willing to work with their learning-disabled son for $35 per hour, a fraction of what they had been paying previous specialists. Patricia's phone call to Angela was filled with condescending assumptions and lowered expectations. "We need someone to handle basic skills since the real schools have failed," she explained. "Marcus is a slow learner who requires very simple approaches." What Patricia didn't realize was that she was about to hire someone who would prove that her son wasn't slow, deficient, or broken. He was simply brilliant in ways that expensive institutions had never bothered to recognize or nurture. While the Richmond family prepared for another expensive educational intervention at a specialized learning disabilities school, Angela Washington made a decision that would challenge everything they believed about intelligence learning and their son's capabilities. Angela's first revolutionary act was completely ignoring every assessment, diagnosis, and educational plan that had been created for Marcus. She threw away the expensive curriculum materials, abandoned the remedial workbooks, and dismissed the behavioral modification charts that had defined his school experience. These materials were designed for a completely different kind of learner, Angela explained to confused parents during her first meeting with Marcus. "Your son needs something entirely different from what he's been getting." Instead of traditional reading materials featuring simplified stories about suburban families, Angela brought graphic novels about space exploration, science magazines with stunning visual content, and books about subjects that fascinated visual learners, ancient civilizations, how machines work, and the mysteries of the natural world. Instead of worksheets filled with repetitive drills, she brought art supplies, building materials, hands-on science experiments, and three-dimensional puzzles that challenged spatial reasoning abilities. Marcus, Angela said during their second session, sitting on the floor of his bedroom, rather than at the formal desk his previous tutors had required, forget everything those other teachers told you about being smart or not smart. I want to discover what your brain does really, really well. This simple statement represented a fundamental shift that no previous educator had attempted, focusing on strengths rather than deficits, discovery rather than remediation, possibility rather than limitation. Angela's assessment method was revolutionary in its simplicity. Rather than standardized tests that measured narrow academic skills, she used what she called genius hunting, presenting Marcus with various types of challenges to see where his mind naturally excelled. She offered complex three-dimensional puzzles, pattern recognition games, spatial reasoning tasks, and creative problem-solving scenarios that required innovative thinking rather than memorized responses. The results were immediate and stunning. Marcus, who supposedly couldn't focus on academic tasks, spent 2 hours building intricate architectural structures with mathematical precision. The child who couldn't read at grade level could solve spatial puzzles that challenged most adults. How many of us have been told we're not good at something when we just needed a different approach? Within 1 week, Angela had identified Marcus as what educational specialists call a visual spatial learner, someone whose intelligence centers on thinking in pictures, patterns, and three-dimensional relationships rather than words and sequential processing. These learners often struggle in traditional verbal linguistic classrooms, but can be extraordinarily gifted in areas like engineering, architecture, scientific visualization, and artistic creation. Unfortunately, most elementary education focuses heavily on verbal linguistic skills, causing visual spatial learners to appear deficient when they're actually operating from a different but equally valid form of intelligence. Marcus, Angela explained in terms a 10-year-old could understand. Your brain is like a supercomputer for seeing how things work and fit together. Most schools only test one kind of smart, but you have a different kind of smart that's actually pretty rare and valuable. Angela began connecting Marcus's learning to his cultural identity and family background. She brought books about young inventors, scientists, and creators who had been underestimated but achieved greatness through persistence and unique thinking. Look at this, Angela said, showing Marcus a biography of George Washington Carver. This man was told he wasn't smart enough for regular school, but he became one of America's greatest scientists because he saw patterns in nature that other people missed. These stories helped Marcus understand that being different didn't mean being deficient. It meant having gifts that required the right environment to flourish. Angela's approach to reading was revolutionary compared to the phonics-based methods that had frustrated Marcus for years. Instead of starting with letters and sounds, she used what she called meaning-first reading. She would show Marcus fascinating pictures or scientific diagrams, get him excited about the topic, then use his curiosity to pull him into reading about subjects he genuinely wanted to understand. Within 2 weeks, Marcus was reading complex science articles about space exploration, not because someone forced him, but because he desperately wanted to understand how rockets work and couldn't get the information any other way. When Angela introduced Marcus to geometry and spatial mathematics areas that perfectly matched his visual spatial strengths, his supposed math disability disappeared overnight. He could visualize complex three-dimensional relationships and solve problems that challenged students several years older. Marcus, you're not bad at math? Angela explained. You've just been forced to do the one small part of math that happens to be emphasized in elementary school. But look what you can do with shapes, patterns, and spatial relationships. Marcus's true genius emerged during hands-on science experiments that required visual spatial reasoning. He could predict how chemical reactions would work, design mechanical solutions to engineering problems, and understand complex scientific concepts when presented visually rather than through verbal explanation. Angela documented these discoveries in detailed reports for Marcus's parents, contrasting his exceptional performance in areas that matched his learning style with his struggles in traditional verbal linguistic tasks. David Richman, reviewing Angela's reports from his business perspective, began recognizing that Marcus's thinking patterns, visual problem-solving pattern recognition, innovative approaches to challenges were exactly the cognitive skills that had made David successful in the tech industry. He thinks like an engineer, David realized during one of Angela's progress meetings. All this time, we've been trying to force him to think like a traditional liberal arts student when his brain is designed for technical innovation. Patricia faced the uncomfortable truth that her social embarrassment about Marcus's academic struggles had blinded her to his actual intellectual gifts. She began seeing how her son's disruptive behaviors were actually creative problem-solving attempts in environments that didn't appreciate or understand his approach. Angela shared her own experiences growing up in Detroit's public schools, where she had seen brilliant children dismissed because their intelligence didn't match middle-class academic expectations. She helped Marcus understand that different communities valued different kinds of intelligence. In my neighborhood, Angela told Marcus, we had kids who could fix complicated machines, create amazing music, solve real-world problems, and take care of whole families. But schools only valued one narrow kind of smart. Your job is to develop your gifts, not apologize for being different. By month 2, Marcus had progressed from first grade reading level to fourth grade level by focusing on high-interest, visually rich materials that matched his learning style. His comprehension was particularly strong when reading about technical subjects, scientific discoveries, and biographies of innovative thinkers. In month 3, Marcus was performing mathematics at middle school level in geometry and spatial reasoning, designing complex structures and solving problems that required advanced three-dimensional thinking. By month 4, Marcus was conducting independent research projects using his visual spatial strengths to understand scientific concepts and present findings through charts, diagrams, and hands-on demonstrations that impressed even Angela with their sophistication. But the greatest test was still coming, a challenge that would prove whether Marcus's transformation was real or simply the result of lowered standards and inflated praise. Just as Marcus was flourishing under Angela's guidance, his former school delivered a challenge that would test everything they had accomplished. Dr. Blackwood, Thornfield Academy's headmaster, had heard rumors about Marcus's supposed improvement and demanded proof that contradicted his professional assessment. I've been in education for 30 years, Dr. Blackwood announced during an unexpected visit to the Richmond mansion, his tone carrying the authority of expensive credentials and institutional prestige. Marcus Richmond lacks the intellectual capacity for rigorous academic work. Any perceived progress is likely superficial improvement that won't withstand proper evaluation. Dr. Blackwood's challenge was both simple and devastating. Marcus would take Thornfield's standard 5th grade placement exam, a test designed for students 2 years older than him, to prove whether his improvement was real or merely the result of lowered expectations. If this child can pass our rigorous academic standards, Dr. Blackwood stated with professional certainty, I will personally recommend him for readmission to Thornfield Academy. But when he fails, and he will fail, perhaps this family will finally accept realistic expectations for his educational future. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Success would vindicate everything Angela had discovered about Marcus's intelligence. Failure would confirm the expensive expert's assessment that he was intellectually limited. Despite months of witnessing Marcus's remarkable growth, David and Patricia felt old fears returning. Dr. Blackwood's confidence and 30 years of educational experience carried weight that Angela's success stories couldn't match in their minds. What if he's right? Patricia whispered to David after Dr. Blackwood left. What if Angela has just been making Marcus feel better without actually improving his real academic abilities? When Marcus overheard his parents discussing the upcoming test, he immediately reverted to his old defensive behaviors. The confident, curious child Angela had nurtured disappeared, replaced by the anxious, defeated boy who believed he was fundamentally stupid. I can't do it, Marcus told Angela, tears streaming down his face. Dr. Blackwood is right about me. I'm too dumb for real school. I'll just embarrass everyone again like I always do. Angela faced a moment that would define both her career and Marcus's future. She could play it safe, acknowledge that traditional academic testing wasn't Marcus's strength, and recommend he avoid the evaluation. Or she could trust completely in the genius she had discovered and help Marcus prove that brilliance comes in many forms. Marcus, Angela said with fierce conviction, Dr. Blackwood is about to learn something that expensive education often misses. You're not going to take his test the way other kids would take it. You're going to show him how a visual spatial genius approaches academic challenges. Instead of traditional test preparation involving drill and practice, Angela spent 2 weeks teaching Marcus how to translate his visual spatial strengths into academic performance. She showed him how to convert word problems into diagrams, how to use spatial reasoning for reading comprehension, and how to approach traditional academic tasks using his unique cognitive gifts. Have you ever watched someone transform their supposed weakness into their greatest strength? Test day arrived with the atmosphere of a formal academic tribunal. Dr. Blackwood brought 2 additional Thornfield faculty members to observe Marcus's evaluation. They arranged themselves in the Richmond family's formal library, surrounding the 10-year-old with the intimidating presence of institutional judgment. This assessment covers reading comprehension, mathematical reasoning, scientific analysis, and written expression at 5th grade level, Dr. Blackwood announced with ceremony. Marcus will have 3 hours to demonstrate his academic capabilities. What happened next had never been witnessed in Thornfield Academy's prestigious 150-year history. Instead of approaching the test like a traditional student, Marcus used the revolutionary visual spatial strategies Angela had taught him. For reading comprehension questions, he drew detailed diagrams of story plots and character relationships, creating visual maps that revealed understanding far beyond grade level. For mathematical problems, he constructed 3-dimensional representations that made complex solutions obvious to anyone watching. For science questions, Marcus built paper models using pencils and scratch paper to understand concepts before answering, demonstrating hands-on learning that impressed the observing educators. When Marcus reached the advanced geometry section, questions specifically designed to challenge 5th graders, something extraordinary happened. He not only solved every problem correctly, but he discovered and explained mathematical relationships that the test designers hadn't even considered. Dr. Blackwood, Marcus said with growing confidence, this triangle problem has 3 different solutions depending on how you rotate the shape in space. Your answer key only shows 1, but I can prove that the others work too. Dr. Blackwood examined Marcus's work with growing amazement. The child had not only passed the 5th grade test, he had demonstrated mathematical insights that exceeded high school level understanding. Wait until you hear what happened next. It shocked everyone in that room. In the reading comprehension section, Marcus created detailed visual story maps that revealed sophisticated analysis of character motivations, plot development, and thematic connections. His understanding was not just above grade level, it was innovative in ways that traditional assessment could never measure. For the science portion, Marcus didn't just provide correct answers. He designed experiments to test hypotheses and created detailed diagrams showing how scientific principles applied to real-world scenarios that fascinated him. After 3 hours of watching Marcus demonstrate genius-level thinking in ways they had never encountered, Dr. Blackwood faced a moment that would humble his 30 years of educational certainty. Mrs. Washington, Dr. Blackwood said quietly, his professional arrogance replaced by genuine humility. I owe you and Marcus a profound apology. We completely failed to recognize this child's extraordinary gifts. His thinking is not just above grade level, it's innovative in ways our traditional assessments could never capture or measure. Marcus looked up at Angela with pure joy and vindication. I told you I wasn't dumb, he said, his confidence completely restored. No, baby. Angela smiled through tears of pride and triumph. You told me you were brilliant from the very first day. Everyone else just needed to learn how to see it. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed something more than academic success. They had seen what happens when someone believes in a child's potential enough to discover how their unique mind actually works and refuses to accept that different means deficient. 6 months after Angela Washington first walked into the Richmond mansion, Marcus was thriving beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Rather than returning to Thornfield Academy, his parents had made the revolutionary decision to continue his education with Angela as his primary teacher, supplemented by specialized programs that honored his visual spatial learning style. Marcus was now reading at college level when the material matched his interests and learning style, designing complex engineering projects that impressed university professors and conducting independent scientific research that had caught the attention of local STEM programs for gifted children. The Richmond family had discovered that the best investment in their son's future wasn't the most expensive school or the most credentialed specialists. It was finding the right teacher who could see his unique gifts and nurture them appropriately. Angela had been hired as Marcus's full-time educational coordinator at $85,000 annually, with additional consulting fees for helping other families whose children had been misdiagnosed by traditional educational systems. Her success with Marcus had generated requests from wealthy families across the country who were discovering that their learning disabled children might actually be misunderstood geniuses. Dr. Blackwood had undergone his own professional transformation, implementing new assessment methods at Thornfield Academy that recognized different types of intelligence and learning styles. Angela became a consultant for the school training teachers to identify and nurture visual spatial learners who had previously been overlooked or mislabeled. The Richmond family established the Hidden Genius Foundation, providing scholarships for culturally responsive tutors to work with children who had been dismissed by traditional education systems. Angela became the foundation's director, earning national recognition for her innovative teaching methods and advocacy for learning differences. David and Patricia had learned to see their son's cognitive differences as intellectual strengths rather than academic deficits. Family time now included engineering projects, science experiments, and creative challenges that celebrated Marcus's unique way of thinking and problem solving. Marcus had transformed from a defeated child who believed he was stupid into a confident, curious learner who understood that his brain worked differently and that different was not deficient, but valuable. He began mentoring other children who struggled in traditional classrooms, showing them that intelligence comes in many forms and that their struggles didn't define their potential. Most importantly, Marcus had learned to advocate for himself, requesting visual learning materials and hands-on approaches when facing new educational challenges. Angela had given him not just academic skills, but the confidence to demand that his learning needs be recognized and met. The ripple effects extended throughout their community. Several other prestigious schools began incorporating Angela's methods, recognizing that traditional approaches were failing to serve diverse learners. Educational consultants started specializing in identifying misdiagnosed gifted children, and parents began questioning expensive institutions that couldn't recognize their children's unique talents. Marcus's story became a powerful example of how the right person can unlock potential that expensive institutions never recognized. His transformation from learning disabled to hidden genius proved that brilliant minds come in many forms, and that the most important qualification for teaching isn't credentials, it's the ability to see and nurture each child's individual gifts. If Marcus and Angela's story touched your heart, and you'd like to hear more inspiring stories about ordinary people who see genius, where others see problems, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I share stories about how the right person can unlock potential that expensive institutions never recognize. Which moment in this story resonated with you most? Have you ever seen a child labeled as slow or difficult when they just needed a different approach? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone recognize the hidden genius in their own child or student. Remember, the next time you meet someone like Angela Washington, pay attention to their wisdom. Sometimes the person who can unlock your child's potential isn't the one with the fanciest credentials or the highest fees. It's the one who takes time to understand how their unique mind actually works and celebrates their differences as gifts rather than deficits.